There are approximately 15,000 Americans living in prepper communities right now that you will never hear about on the news, never see on reality television, and never find with a simple Google search. They've spent decades, and in some cases millions of dollars, ensuring that when you're wondering where to find clean water on day 3 of the collapse, they'll already be harvesting their second crop rotation in fortified compounds you didn't know existed. And before we go any further, I need to be clear about something. The reason I know what I'm about to tell you is because I was allowed to see it. Not because I infiltrated anything or hacked databases, but because over the past 6 years, I've earned enough trust with people in this world to be shown things that outsiders don't see. Everything I'm about to describe is real, but I've changed names, locations, and certain identifying details because exposing these people would destroy the exact thing that makes them worth understanding. If you need coordinates and addresses to believe something exists, this isn't for you. But if you can handle the idea that the most important preparations happen in the shadows, then listen very carefully. Most of what you see labeled as prepping is theater. The guy on YouTube showing you his bug-out bag, the family documenting their homestead on Instagram, the doomsday bunker salesman doing cable news interviews, they're all compromised at the moment they go public. Real prepper communities, the ones that might actually survive a prolonged collapse, operate on a principle borrowed from Cold War intelligence work. The best security is nobody knowing you exist in the first place. But they leave traces if you know where to look. Property records with unusual purchasing patterns, water rights acquisitions in remote areas, building permits for equipment storage that require 3-phase power, and septic systems rated for 50 people. The footprints are there, you just have to understand what you're seeing. The first time I saw one of these places, I didn't even realize what I was looking at. I was visiting someone I'd met through mutual friends, driving through what looked like rural ranch country in the Mountain West. Nice properties, well-maintained fences, a few cattle grazing, nothing remarkable. Then my host casually mentioned that the 7 properties we'd just passed were all part of the same group, 23 families total, 4,000 acres, purchased over 12 years using different LLCs so the pattern wouldn't show up. To the county assessor, it looks like a collection of small ranches with different owners. In reality, it's a single coordinated unit with shared resources, unified command structure during emergencies, and interlocking fields of fire covering every access road. The primary access road is deliberately kept in poor condition, bad enough that casual visitors turn around, good enough that their own vehicles manage fine. When I asked why they were willing to show me, the answer was blunt. Because you can't find us even if you wanted to, and we know you won't try. That's when I understood the real game being played. These people aren't hiding from Google Earth or property records, they're hiding from pattern recognition, from looking like anything other than what rural America has always looked like. Families on land, making a living, minding their business. Let's call this place Blacktail Ridge, because I need something to call it, and because that name could apply to 10,000 ridges across the Mountain West. What makes Blacktail Ridge different isn't just scale, it's that they've weaponized normalcy. They run a small timber operation, a metal fabrication shop, and lease grazing rights to a local cattle operation that's actually owned by a member. These aren't cover businesses, they're profitable enterprises that generate real income and provide the perfect explanation for everything that would otherwise look suspicious. Heavy equipment on the property? Timber operation. Significant power consumption? Metal fabrication shop. Regular large deliveries? Business supplies. The county commissioners see tax-paying operations employing local people, not a survivalist compound. This is strategic invisibility. You hide by being useful enough that nobody asks questions. Here's what hit me hardest during that first visit. I was having dinner with these families, completely normal conversation about weather and livestock and whose kid was graduating. And I realized the woman sitting across from me casually discussing her vegetable garden was also the community's primary trauma surgeon. The guy talking about timber prices runs their perimeter security training. The friendly grandmother asking if I wanted more potatoes oversees ammunition reloading for the entire community. They weren't pretending to be normal people, they were normal people who'd made abnormal preparations, and the fact that I couldn't tell the difference was the entire point. The vetting process to join a community like this is where things get genuinely unsettling, and I mean that as a compliment to their operational security. You don't just show up with money and good intentions. The screening for Blacktail Ridge took one family nearly 3 years. First contact only happens through trusted personal reference from an existing member, which eliminates random inquiries entirely. Then comes a background investigation that goes deeper than anything you've experienced outside of government security clearances. They're not just checking if you've committed crimes, they're talking to your former neighbors. They're reviewing your social media going back a decade, looking for patterns of instability, attention-seeking behavior, or ideological extremism that could compromise the group. They're verifying that the skills you claim to possess are real. If you say you're a machinist, you're going to be handed a lathe and asked to prove it. One community requires potential members to complete a week-long working interview where you perform actual labor alongside members while being constantly evaluated. They're watching how you handle frustration when something doesn't work, whether you pull your weight or make excuses, how you interact with their children, whether you can follow instructions from someone you might not like. They're not looking for survival Rambos or people running from failed lives. They want emotionally stable, competent people who bring specific value: medical training, mechanical skills, agricultural experience, construction knowledge, communications expertise, security backgrounds. And here's the part that stuck with me. One community leader told me, "We've rejected people with perfect skills because they felt wrong, too eager, too angry. We're not building a militia, we're building a village that can survive without outside help, and that means we can't afford assholes or narcissists." That line stuck with me for weeks. These communities have studied why intentional communities fail, and most fail within 5 years, and they've systematically addressed every failure mode. Communes collapse because of disputes over work distribution, resource allocation, leadership, and ideology. Successful prepper communities avoid this by doing something most preppers never think about. They write it all down first. Actual bylaws that function like a corporate charter established before conflict arises. Who makes decisions and how, what the work requirements are, usually a minimum number of hours per week contributing to community projects, what the conflict gets resolved, and what the buy-in requirements are, and what happens if someone wants to leave. It sounds bureaucratic, and it is, but bureaucracy just means agreed-upon rules that prevent the strongest personality from tearing the group apart when things get tense. I saw this in action during my second visit to Blacktail Ridge. 2 families were in a dispute over property boundaries and shared equipment use. In most groups, this would fester and explode. Here, they followed the written process, presented the issue to the council, both sides made their case, the council voted, decision was made, everyone moved on. Nobody liked the outcome equally, which meant it was probably fair. The point is, it didn't destroy anything because the process was already there. The financial barrier to entry is significant and deliberate. Buy-ins range from about $80,000 to over $500,000 depending on what's already built. That money covers your property share, proportional ownership of common infrastructure, and contribution to the community emergency fund. The economic barrier serves 2 purposes. It ensures you have real skin in the game, and it filters for people who have their lives together enough to have accumulated resources. They'll reduce the buy-in for certain high-value skills. A physician might pay half the standard amount because medical capability is worth more than cash, but they're not running a charity. When someone told me, "We're not building a lifeboat for refugees, we're building a village for people who plan ahead," I understood exactly what they meant. And I also understood how dark that calculation becomes when you follow it through. Here's where things get brutal, and it's something every one of these communities has gamed out and made peace with. When systems collapse and desperate people start showing up at the gate asking for help, these communities have already decided what they're going to do. They're going to say no. They've calculated their carrying capacity, how many people their water, food production, and security can sustain, and they've agreed that exceeding that number means everyone dies slower. One person described it to me this way: "If I give food to the stranger at the gate, I'm taking food from my daughter." Once you frame it like that, the choice becomes very clear. I'm not endorsing this. I'm telling you it exists, and they've already made the decision. Water tells you everything about whether a community is serious or cosplaying. Blacktail Ridge doesn't have a well with a hand pump. They control an entire watershed. That means they own property upstream from their primary location, ensuring that contamination or interdiction would require controlling terrain they actively monitor. multiple extraction points, redundant storage and concealed tanks, gravity-fed distribution that functions without power. The legal structure involves water rights purchased during initial land acquisition, often at agricultural rates. In the American West, water rights can be separated from land ownership and traded independently, so you can quietly assemble a secure water supply over years without anyone noticing you're building infrastructure for 100 people. Food production follows the same philosophy. 3 tiers. Daily production from dairy animals, chickens, and greenhouses. Bulk calorie crops like wheat and potatoes grown on enough acreage to feed everyone for a year. Strategic reserves of commercially produced long-term storage foods. The key is they're actually rotating through everything, eating from storage regularly and replacing what they consume. They're not waiting for the apocalypse to figure out how to cook wheat berries. They already know because they do it routinely. The security posture exists in a gray space between a neighborhood watch and a paramilitary organization. They train regularly with firearms on their own property, in shoot houses and rifle ranges they've built. The training isn't casual. They run scenarios, vehicle interdiction, perimeter breach response, coordinated defense, medical evacuation under fire. Some have members with military backgrounds who structure this using actual small unit tactics. During one visit, I watched them run a nighttime perimeter drill. No announcement, just someone triggering an alert, and within 12 minutes, every fighting-age adult was in position with night vision and communications. They ran the scenario, identified where their response broke down, debriefed immediately, then everyone went back to their homes like nothing had happened. The casualness of their competence was more unsettling than if they'd been playing soldier. Medicine gets legally questionable fast. Several communities have recruited doctors or nurses, sometimes offering reduced land costs because medical capability is that valuable. But having a doctor isn't enough without supplies. Antibiotics purchased through veterinary channels, which are chemically identical to human formulations but available without prescriptions. Surgical instruments, suture materials, dental tools. Some run regular medical drills so multiple people can handle trauma stabilization and wound management. They've built relationships with sympathetic physicians who provide guidance and occasionally write prescriptions that end up in the community pharmacy. When you're planning for scenarios where 911 doesn't answer, conventional medical ethics become negotiable. What these communities understand that most preppers don't is that the biggest threats aren't the ones that make good television. It's not roving gangs. It's disease, starvation, and exposure affecting unprepared populations who then become desperate refugees. It's the breakdown of sanitation leading to disease outbreaks. It's minor injuries becoming infected and killing people because antibiotics aren't available. The communities that have thought past the initial event and gamed out months 6 through 24 have made preparations that seem excessive until you understand what they're modeling. They've accumulated libraries of physical books covering disappearing skills, blacksmithing, timber framing, traditional agriculture, veterinary medicine, mechanical repair without computer diagnostics, food preservation. Reference manuals stored in climate-controlled spaces for scenarios where the internet is gone and expertise has died. They're also transferring these skills to their children early. I watched a 10-year-old girl confidently process a chicken from slaughter to freezer while explaining each step to me. Kids in these communities are learning animal husbandry, marksmanship, canning, basic construction, and gardening by age 12. That level of practical knowledge embedded in the next generation is cultural transmission designed to survive the collapse of formal education systems. The communities that have existed for more than a decade are dealing with second-generation pressures now. Children who grew up in the community are reaching adulthood and choosing whether to stay or leave for education and opportunities outside. This creates real tension. One founder told me with pain in his voice, "My son thinks we're paranoid. He wants to go to college in California. I can't stop him, but I also can't protect them if he's 1,000 miles away when things go sideways." The communities navigating this successfully create pathways for young people to leave for education while maintaining connection and option to return, essentially creating a diaspora network that could reconstitute if triggered by events. Here's what haunts me about all of this. These communities might be right. Not about every specific threat scenario, but at the core calculation that complex systems are fragile and that self-sufficiency at community scale is the most rational response to systemic uncertainty. They're not waiting for help that might not come. They're not depending on supply chains that could break. They're not trusting that institutions will function when stressed. And while you can argue they're paranoid or antisocial or selfish, you can't argue they're unprepared. When I think about the gap between what they've built and what most people have done, which is nothing, it's staggering. The future probably involves more of these communities, smaller, more distributed, and more invisible. Property in suitable locations is expensive now. Privacy is harder to maintain. Regulations are more restrictive. The adaptation is towards networks of affiliated families on separate properties within a region, connected by trust and preparation, but not obviously linked. This provides resilience against any single point of failure while maintaining operational security. If you're wondering whether you should try to find one of these communities or start your own, understand what you're actually considering. You're not buying insurance or adding a line item to your preparedness checklist. You're choosing to organize your entire life around a set of assumptions about the future that most people consider extreme. And you're committing to a level of operational security and personal sacrifice that will separate you from the mainstream forever. The people who've done this successfully didn't do it casually. They spent years finding the right people, acquiring the right property, building the right infrastructure, and most importantly, building trust within a group that will have to depend on each other when everything else fails. I'll tell you what one of the founders of Blacktail Ridge told me on my last visit, standing on a ridge overlooking their valley as the sun went down. He said, "I hope we wasted our money. I hope in 20 years our kids are laughing at us for building all this for nothing. But if we didn't waste our money, if things go the way they might go, then at least my grandchildren will have a chance." That's the psychology at the core of all of this. It's not nihilism or apocalyptic fantasy. It's the deeply human impulse to protect your people against an uncertain future by controlling as many variables as you possibly can. The hidden prepper communities exist. They're more sophisticated than you imagine, more invisible than you'd think possible, and more committed than makes sense to anyone who hasn't made the same calculation. You don't know where they are, how many exist, or who belongs to them, and that's exactly how they want it, because the moment you know where they are is the moment they're no longer hidden, and the moment they're no longer hidden is the moment their advantage disappears. The best preparation is the kind nobody knows about until it's too late to matter. They've already won that game. The question is whether you even knew you were playing.